And it seems even within that, because the brain is central to the energy balance model, and we're talking about all sorts of signals, whether from the brain or from the gut, that are controlling hunger, that sort of hunger story would even fit within the evidence energy balance model, would it not?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So the brain is receiving cues like constantly about every process going on in the body. And we don't really have a solid grasp on a lot of these, what exactly is being communicated when and why and how. But that's what I think the science is really exciting and interested in finding out. But the communication between your body as it's digesting a meal or as it's not eating and would like to eat with the brain is like at the forefront of why we then go out and seek food. So hunger is a huge cue. But there's also interactions and communications that occur kind of below this subconscious feeling of, wow, I'm hungry. And that's why, when you're eating a bag of popcorn at a movie theater, you aren't reaching back in and eating more because your body's like, I'm still hungry, I'm still hungry. It might just be this passive overconsumption that occurs too. So, I don't think it's all just hunger and that's the only thing driving consumption. And if we just got a rein on that, we'd be fine. I think there's still a number of cues or exposures that we may not even be able to tangibly define yet that contribute. And this EBM model, it allows for this complexity in the environment and how we interact with it, and acknowledges that there is still a lot unknown. And I would love for it to be as simple as carbohydrates. I mean, that with my public health perspective and kind of stepping outside of the lab and just curiosity and mechanisms, from a public health perspective, like we need a solution to this obesity epidemic. It's a crisis that is so detrimental in many health outcomes and quality of life. And it's, expanding globally to the point where it's very concerning with some of the populations in terms of diabetes and downstream cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes at even younger ages. And, having a solution, and if it was simple, like we just need to cut out the refined carbs, would be fantastic. And that, would be not something I would personally be biased against. But, as we illustrated in this most recent review, the evidence just isn't there as that being this single causal agent we can just kind of pluck out of the food system to then put everything back to where it was kind of a few decades ago. So
yeah, I mean, it definitely, with seeing patients and clients, I mean, you get the people are working seemingly longer hours, so they sleep less. And then, of course, later at night now, after long, stressful days, they tend to, these ultra processed foods are kind of all around us. So it's Netflix and bag of chips or ice cream or wine. And now sleep quality is not so good. We wake up the next day a little more tired. And whether we're caffeinating extra or again, we're having to navigate this environment of all these snack foods that are around us, it seems like environment would be playing a pretty large role.
yeah.
Just looking at, say, European countries, when you being over here in the UK, it's interesting because the UK is similar to Canada and the US, where over 50% of household spendings on ultra processed food. And it's strange here because you can take a train for 2 hours and you're in France, and all of a sudden it's 14%. And people, the general, whilst there's still movement towards gaining weight, it's a marked difference when you just look at the population across all of Europe, and that sort of the exposure to these snack foods, whilst it's increasing, isn't quite the same as, let's say, North America, Canada, the US. Now, I'd like to just touch on the energy partitioning portion of the paper. I recently had Professor Paul Larson on, Lucas Cyprian as well, and their work on very low carb diets in overfat individuals combined with HIIT training. And of course, we know that for certain populations like type 2 diabetics, reducing carbohydrate could have some obviously potential wins there in terms of improving, insulin resistance and these types of things. Now, they noted that only the dietary intervention improved body composition. And Prof. Larson was touching on the fact that, from his point of view, this couldn't be explained by the calories in, calories out model. Now, appreciate that I'm just throwing this out at you now, but if you had to speculate again, is this sort of the energy partitioning portion of the paper? This is where I was sort of, in reading it, was thinking, but what part of the EBM model could be accounting for this, reduction in visceral adiposity that seems to be happening without that major shift in energy?
So, where fat is being stored and why, and are macronutrients or some aspects of diet determinants of how fat is stored and where, or how calories are utilized and mobilized and where, I think is something that the CIM, the carbohydrate insulin model, has really capitulated on, but is also very much part of the EBM in terms of they're having differential effects between carbs and protein and fat, and where their circulating fuels might then tend to be stored or utilized. So if we think of visceral or central adiposity, that calorie is a calorie is not what EBM is stating. There very much could be metabolic differences between the fuel sources, and that's again not quite the same conversation as weight gain and obesity if we're talking about type 2 diabetes or insulin resistance or inflammation or fatty liver. Like all of these other concerns metabolically with diet might take on a very different conversation between the macronutrients. And of course, obesity tends to be upstream of a lot of these. So what role do different macronutrients have in downstream effects on body composition, or in the context of weight loss, in where weight loss is observed or coming from, I think is consistent with EBM entirely. Yeah.
Yeah. So it seems like just another slice of the model, would you say?
Yeah. And I think that, the calories all being equal notion that is maybe just really unfortunate misbranding of EBM. Yeah, it's an oversimplification, and I see it in almost every carbohydrate insulin model paper or book or chapter. It starts with why EBM is flawed because it hasn't staved the obesity epidemic, because telling people not to eat too many calories just hasn't worked. And I think this is, if a hypothesis has to start by like debunking another one, then it's almost a non-starter for me. Like, just sell me your science. Don't, have to put down another model incorrectly or mischaracterize it to, whether intentionally or not, to build your case, right? The one model being wrong doesn't by default make yours right. That's what I'm essentially trying to say. And so, sure. The mischaracterization of the energy balance model as all calories are equal, you have 1,000 calories coming in, and how you use them doesn't matter what they're comprised of, equals, whatever you expended that day, the rest gets stored. That's such an oversimplification, and I think everybody knows that by now, so it's confusing while it keeps getting perpetuated as what the EBM is all about. And then there's also this kind of disconnect between what an obesity model might hypothesize and what's happening on the population level, right? So we talked about efficacy versus effectiveness. Mm-hmm. And of course, telling the population to eat fewer calories isn't going to be effective for reducing total calories, let alone staving off the obesity epidemic, because it's not the conscious overeating of calories that got us there in the first place that we're just asking people to stop. Mm-hmm. So the cause of this obesogenic environment is now trying to be, I guess, like battled or put off with just having this willpower to overcome it. Like, of course, that's setting everyone up for failure. So it's, assuming that EBM is all about like willpower and people just need to try harder to eat fewer calories is also just a total misinterpretation. And when we say, brain is at the center of this model, it's not necessarily saying conscious awareness and choices and hunger that you feel and then choose to act on. It's brain communicating with your peripheral tissues below the subconscious awareness, and the cues that you observe in your environment because a food is comforting or palatable or whatever it might be, that again is probably operating well below your conscious radar. And so again, mischaracterization has been an issue, and I can see how the name is misleading. I mean, in nutrition science, we have a lot of really unfortunate misbranding issues, and EBM is probably, also prone to that.
Great summary. And, in your opinion, when we look at the food environment, obviously corporations and big business are driving a lot of what we're being exposed to, and they're making a lot of money. And when we look at what government has or programs have to offset that, it's swimming upstream, to put it mildly. I mean, And in this sort of strong current that's pulling all of us down towards energy excess and overconsumption, in your research or just your opinion and insights, what are some of the things we can think about doing to start creating an environment where for the general population who are working long hours and lacking sleep, so that the right decision just becomes the more default versus having to actively avoid all of the processed options on your way home, when we know that when we're stressed and tired, those are going to be the things that the brain is kind of looking for.
Yeah, I mean, that's like the $1 billion question, right? So there's almost no one single solution to kind of wave a wand and get this environment to have the default's the healthy choice, because it's just so complicated, and not just because of the food industry, but because of how society's changed in the last several decades, and the fact that we are busy and tired, and it's making a big and having these easy or, prepared for you already options for families on the go and individuals working many jobs or hours is important. And, so I think it's not the default or the new environment or whatever it might be that is envisioned isn't kind of going back in time. It's how do we work with what we have? And a lot of the foods, the ultra processed foods in particular, are like specifically designed to overcome your conscious choice that you're making.
They're doing their job very well.
Yeah, when you're on the go, or when you're exhausted, or when you have a budget, like these foods know that, and that's specifically what they're designed to attract you to purchase them over another product for. All market share science comes down to this R&D, this research and development, which for foods is really heavy on getting people to be repeat purchasers. How do we make it tasty and affordable and on the go? And so I don't know how to overcome that. I think there's still a lot we don't know about why certain foods or food groups, or maybe all of ultra processed foods, do tend to lead to overeating or might be a cause of the obesity epidemic. I don't think we know exactly what it is about them. So maybe we can isolate that one causal factor or feature or whatever it might be and remove it, right? That would be kind of best case scenario, but I don't know that that's really what we'll end up finding. It could require much more substantial structural changes and buy-in from, the food industries themselves, and who knows? But I think expecting society to just kind of try harder is not going to be the solution, because that's not what it's about.